Plan on flying? It's time to upgrade to a real ID. Because in order to board domestic flights, your driver's license or state-issued ID must be a real ID, or you'll need another acceptable form of identification. So don't wait. Find out how to get your real ID at tsa.gov/realid. That's tsa.gov/realid, or visit your local DMV. And then you'll be cleared for takeoff.
Hello and welcome to Reverie True Crime. I'm your host, Paige. Do you ever wonder if your life would be different if you hadn't done that one thing? If you hadn't been at that one place at that particular time? Maybe it would have changed the course of your whole life. When a lost teenage boy was wandering the mall, hoping to find someone to call a friend, searching to find a place to fit in, he met a boy who was 20 years old. The teenager began looking up to him and wanted to please him, to do anything to earn his respect. The 20-year-old eventually began discussing his cult beliefs, which involved the game Dungeons and Dragons, vampirism, and extremely dark fantasies. The teenager would hate to disappoint this person that he admired, and he even feared what may happen to him if he didn't do what he was told. This story takes many twists and turns, with only the two boys knowing exactly what happened one horrifying spring night in a forested area. There are three aspects of this story. We have the teenager's accounts, the 20-year-old's accounts, and the actual truth somewhere in between. A lot of people tend to think that if these two had never met, especially the teenager, they likely would have never committed the atrocious act on their own, but the two together were a dangerous pair. The encouragement of one another, the manipulation, and feeding each other's egos led to one unsuspecting girl's tragic death. As a warning, this episode does contain descriptions of animal sacrifices and human sacrifice. This is the story of the Dungeons and Dragons sacrificial killing of Melissa Meyer. Let's dive into it. Jason Wayne Rose was 20 years old in the spring of 1988, and he lived in Eugene, Oregon. John Ray Jones was 17 years old when he crossed paths with Jason at a mall that they both frequented. Jason and John were polar opposites in a lot of ways. Even though they both came from broken homes and were outcasts, Jason was more of a leader, described as being similar to Charles Manson. John was characterized as a loyal follower. Jason was said to have a charming personality, but at the same time, his behavior was a problem. Nobody wanted to be on Jason's bad side. If he was mad enough, he would lash out or physically fight his acquaintances that he felt did something wrong to him. He never had any close friends because he would get into disputes with them and find new people to hang around. It was a constant cycle. However, his charisma would draw kids towards him who were lost and outsiders. John Jones led a lonely life with not many friends. He was said to be clever and likable, but he was a lost drifter who wanted to be accepted. He would do anything to feel validated and respected by his peers. When he met Jason, he clung on to him because John finally felt acknowledged, understood, and appreciated. Soon, Jason wanted to know where he was and who he was talking to at all times. Jason was a paranoid person who assumed a lot of people were against him and out to get him. Everyone saw his controlling behavior except John. The two were both obsessed with the tabletop role-playing game Dungeons and Dragons. The obsession with the game became a dangerous one. Jason and John began worshiping a character in the game called Arioch, the god of chaos, evil, and death. Jason indulged himself in vampirism and had several friends that would go along with his beliefs, even encouraging him and John. It was exactly the fuel they both, especially Jason, craved for their egos. Jason told John that they could turn themselves and others into vampires. According to John, Jason believed in it so much, and the passion behind Jason's words convinced John to believe that he was indeed morphing into a vampire. Even though John couldn't understand why, he was still able to see himself in the mirror and could still go outside in the sun. Jason told him those were all fantasies that others just made up, that vampires could, in fact, do all those things. Jason began performing rituals and sacrifices using cats, chickens, and rabbits. People's animals were disappearing around the area, and Jason was likely the reason why. He would hang these animals, pluck their eyes out, and stab them. On one occasion, in front of a female friend, Jason had a glass filled with what he claimed was blood from a goat, and he drank it. Torturing and maiming innocent animals began not to satisfy Jason enough. One of their friends was expecting a baby, and Jason tried to coax her into letting him remove her baby and use him or her as a sacrificial offering to the devil. This chilled her to the bone. Jason's fascination and dangerous obsession with human sacrifices and cherry-picking out of the Satanic Bible would lead to desires to act out his twisted fantasies. He wanted to know what it would feel like to kill a human, to sacrifice them. Jason and John first attempted to kidnap a woman from a mall. According to John, it was Jason who took the first initiative of committing these crimes. Luckily, this woman was able to get away. They believed by offering life to Arioch that they would be able to receive the person's energy and power. Jason and John even created a hit list of people they knew, people they wanted to sacrifice. The rune stones from the Dungeons and Dragons game played an essential role in their madness. Runes are little raised stones with engravings on them that all hold a different meaning and are empowered with magic. Jason and John believed the runes would decide who the victim would be, the time of the sacrifice, and where it would all take place. Melissa Meyer was 19 years old and was originally from Seattle. Her parents, Nancy and Jack, thought that it would be great for their daughter to move to what they thought was a nice, small, quiet community in Eugene, Oregon. After all, her brother was studying there to achieve his master's degree, and the two could share an apartment together. Melissa was ready for this fresh start in her life. She was very kind, polite, and well-mannered. She began to make new friends. John Jones, who she met at the mall, was one person that she connected with and trusted the most. If she ever needed any advice or someone to talk to, she went to John before she went to anyone else. As Jason and John would talk about human sacrifices, they wanted to kill someone they knew because it would be easier to lure them into their trap if the victim trusted them. However, it was up to the runes to decide who would be the official sacrifice. Melissa was hanging out with John and Jason on May 30th, 1988, when they talked her into going out to their makeshift campground in the woods. John said, quote, "We just started joking around with each other and stuff, and by the time dark came, Jay went out and grabbed one of his books, black magic books, and went out, lit 2 candles, and started doing a spell. Jason took out the rune stones and rolled them in front of John. He turned to him and said Melissa had to be killed because the runes said so, and the runes never lie." Jason later said to a police officer on video, which we will discuss later, as he was wearing short purple shorts with no shirt and standing on a large tree limb by the scene, quote, "John goes, 'We should kill her now,' and I said, 'Not yet.' The police officer replied, 'Okay, but you said?' And John butts in quickly, 'But I wanted the bitch dead as of now. The runes said so, and we don't disobey the runes." This episode is sponsored by Athletic Greens. With 1 delicious scoop of AG1, you're absorbing 75 high-quality vitamins, minerals, whole food source superfoods, probiotics, and adaptogens to help you start your day right. This special blend of ingredients supports your gut health, your nervous system, your immune system, your energy, recovery, focus, and aging. It's lifestyle friendly, whether you eat keto, paleo, vegan, dairy-free, or gluten-free. There's less than 1 gram of sugar, no GMOs, no nasty chemicals or artificial anything, while still tasting good. You'll get better sleep, better recovery, better mental clarity, and alertness. To make it easy, Athletic Greens is going to give you a free year of supply of immune-supporting vitamin D and 5 free travel packs with your first purchase at athleticgreens.com/emerging. Again, that is athleticgreens.com/EMERGING to take ownership over your health and pick up the ultimate daily nutritional insurance. Melissa, of course, had no idea her death was being discussed not far from where she was. Jason asked John, "Are you going to kill her? You should take her for a walk." At that moment, John thought about taking her home, but instead, he didn't. John could have saved her life, yet he chose not to save this young woman who thought he was her true friend. They crept up on Melissa and started being aggressive. She began to realize what was happening and that she hadn't been invited there for a fun, chill time at the campsite. The 2 young men's intentions were clear. John and Jason began to whisper to each other, and that's when Melissa begged John to help her. As he talked to her and distracted her, Jason attacked Melissa from behind. Jason said, "I walked up behind her, put my hands on her shoulder from behind, and I said, 'I'm not gonna kill you. Even though I'm so pissed right now, I could kill you, but I'm not going to. But I'm gonna knock you out.' I put my arm around her neck from behind and put a sleeper hold on her to knock her out." As Melissa gasped for air, she could barely say, "I can't breathe." John responded hatefully, "If you couldn't breathe, you wouldn't be able to ask for help." As Jason and John were at the scene in the woods, located in Springfield, Oregon, they were being videotaped by law enforcement. They were there to reenact what happened with a mannequin and to tell what they said during that time. The video is telling of many things. That video will be linked in the show notes if you would like to watch it for yourself. Jason and John act completely unfazed, enthusiastic even, behaving like they really didn't care that they had taken someone's life. The two recalled what happened after Jason snuck up behind Melissa and put her in a chokehold. John said, "Then he tightened the hold on her. She reached out to me again and I said, 'Do you think I'd really help you, bitch?'" Jason said, "At that point, it was just a nice tight hold. She reaches up and grabs my hair. I let go of the hold, pulling her out of my hair. She pulled my hair out. By that time, I was mad again." The police officer asks, "Does that get your temper going? What are you saying now?" Jason says, "You're gonna wish you hadn't done that, bitch," as he tightens his hold on the mannequin. The officer said, "Okay, what did you do? Go ahead." Jason said, "I totally tightened down and put all my strength into it." And the officer asked, "Okay, how long did you do that?" Jason said, "About 15-20 minutes. Without loosening up, just leaving it hard, and she went totally limp." The officer asked, "What is she doing? Is she gurgling? Is she breathing hard?" Jason responded, "She wasn't doing anything when she went out." The officer said, "Okay, prior to going out." Jason said, "Prior to going out, she was just sitting there, dragged back, and she went, ugh, letting out with air, and I didn't drop her. I lowered her to the ground like that, and she dropped like that." All as he demonstrates the movements. While in the interrogation room, John stated, "Jay rotates her body to where she's laying face down on the ground. He tells me to get the machete, and I didn't want to defy him at the time, so I did." Jason began chanting so-called prayers to Arioch as John attempted to kill Melissa with the machete. Jason said that John hacked at her neck twice, but the blade was too dull. When that failed, Jason began strangling her with his bare hands. As this all happened, the two were casually talking back and forth about Melissa being their sacrifice. Melissa went unconscious, but when she finally came to, Jason told her to stop resisting. He asked her, "Why are you resisting? You should be honored and proud to be a sacrifice, going through the 7th gate." Jason told police, quote, "I think the reason why she didn't struggle so much is I said you're a black witch. We're giving you the greatest honor to sit at the right hand of Arioch in hell as a sacrifice." And then she quit struggling. Jason and John took a homemade 8-foot wooden spear and placed it across Melissa's neck, standing on each end to press the spear down really hard. For 20 long minutes they continued, and afterwards the two were sure that she was no longer alive. John said, "We really didn't want to at that point, but she was so far along that we just decided to put her out of her misery." The officer asked Jason, "Do you agree with that?" And he said, "Yes, I do." The officer said, "Okay, did you talk about putting her out of her misery?" Jason said, "No, we just did it." Jason recalled while he demonstrated to the police, quote, "I check there and I go, there's no pulse here. She's getting cold. John, what is your diagnosis?" He said, "She's dead." I said, "The fucking bitch is dead. What are we gonna do?" They also claimed a purple mist left her mouth when she passed around 11 o'clock that night. John said, quote, "I said, now what are you gonna do? I'm scared to death. You made me an accessory to the crime. Thanks a fucking lot. The only reason why I helped you was because of Ariok, because I don't want to be punished for not helping you." At that point, they began to conceal her body, the evidence, and stage the scene to look like Melissa had been raped. Jason and John removed her clothes, and as they demonstrated on the video, Jason grabbed the female mannequin's arms as John took a hold of the feet. They swung the body back and forth, tossing the body down the hillside into a pile of brush. John said as the mannequin body landed, referring to Melissa, "She's dead now 'cause I heard a bunch of things break." The officer asked him what he said after John said that. Jason responded, "I said I agree." In the reenactment video, this seemed to be all a joke to John and Jason. It was a disgusting game they were playing, and they showed not a shred of sympathy, no compassion whatsoever. Melissa's life meant nothing to the two young men. When asked why this happened, Jason at one time stated he was furious at Melissa. He thought she was friendly with someone he considered an enemy. The Corvallis Gazette-Times newspaper reported on March 28, 1989, that an anonymous source who knew Melissa, John, and Jason said the boys wanted to silence her. They were paranoid that Melissa was going to tell a drug dealer where they were. After the murder, Jason and John took off with John's grandparents, who were taking a vacation to Arizona. On June 1st, 1988, the police were called about a body in the woods near a water filtration plant and went to investigate. There they discovered Melissa Meyer's body. The Springfield police chief said they were given a tip by an anonymous acquaintance of the boys who led them to where they were. John claimed that Jason began to read the newspapers, and each time he saw an article about Melissa, he would laugh and say, "They're never going to catch us." Days later, Jason Rose and John Jones were arrested at a motel where they were staying with John's grandparents in Show Low, Arizona. Jason had told John they'd be friends till death and that he'd do anything for him. John said he didn't realize anything meant causing him to be behind prison bars. Dr. George Sakow, a forensic psychologist who testified at Jason's trial, stated that usually with people who are antisocial and hurt someone else in the manner they did, especially when it came to Jason, the pleasure they likely got from it would be intoxicating. The feeling of power that they could get away with anything, rooting each other on and manipulating each other, boosting one another's egos. It was a huge power trip. John was said to not have the strength mentally or physically that Jason did. John wanted to please Jason, and he wanted Jason to respect him. They were both called achievers who would go above and beyond to accomplish anything they put their mind to, even if that thing was murder. John and Jason flew from Arizona back to Springfield, Oregon, as they decided not to contest being extradited. Since Jason was 20 years old, he was taken to the Lane County Jail. 17-year-old John was taken to the Skipworth Juvenile Detention Center. According to a decision by the state in response to an appeal that Jason made in 1991, what Jason and John said on video is slightly different than what was said in court at Jason's trial. I'm going to read this to you because I want everyone to have all the information I could find. But keep in mind, Jason and John changed their stories quite a bit. I'm sure you know to take everything with a grain of salt, since it's impossible to know everything that took place in those woods that awful night. All we have are these two boys' accounts of what took place. In the decision, it states, on May 30th, 1988, Jason, John, and Melissa Meyer went to a campsite that Jason and John had set up earlier. Jason and Melissa went into the bushes to have intercourse. About 45 minutes later, Jason heard voices and footsteps. He thought that someone named Vaughn Shelton might be looking for him. Jason left Melissa to find John. He and John then took spears and began looking for Vaughn Shelton. Soon thereafter, Melissa came up behind Jason, which startled him. He turned and threatened her with his spear. John asked Jason, "Should we kill her now?" And Jason answered, "Not yet, but I want the bitch dead. The runes said so, and we don't disobey the runes." Later, Melissa told Jason and John that she was working for Vaughn Shelton. Jason became very angry and stated, "Bitch, you shouldn't have told me that. I don't want to kill you, but it looks like we have to now to survive." Jason grabbed Melissa around her neck and wrenched down hard. She struggled, but finally became unconscious, and Jason laid her face down on the ground. Jason removed the sweater that the victim was wearing, which he had loaned to her earlier in the evening to keep warm. When he pulled the sweater off of her, her jacket also came off. Jason said, quote, "In the name of Arioch, we grant you your sacrifice now." John struck the victim twice on the back of her neck with a machete. Jason walked towards Melissa, and as he did, her body rolled over so that it was face up. Melissa was still breathing, and she started to regain consciousness. Jason karate chopped her in the throat and brought his elbow down into her stomach just below her ribs. Jason checked Melissa's pulse and felt that she still had one. He straddled her body and choked her with his hands for 5 to 10 minutes. John then suggested that they lay a spear across her neck. Jason agreed, and the men stood on both ends of the spear for about 20 minutes, talking about what the rune stones had said to them. Jason and John checked Melissa's body. They did not feel a pulse, and her body felt cold. Nonetheless, to be certain she was dead, they stood on the spear for another 5 minutes, talking about what the runes said to do. The cause of death was asphyxia due to strangulation. Jason took Melissa's 3 necklaces, and he and John took her rings. The two then threw Melissa's body down a gully. While Jason performed a ritual to keep evil spirits away, John covered her body with brush and a board. They placed the necklaces in Melissa's purse and carried the purse, the rings, the sweater, and Melissa's jacket back to their campsite. Jason built a fire and threw some of Melissa's jewelry into the fire as a sacrifice to 2 gods who take jewelry and crafted items as sacrifices. Jason and John kept the jewelry that they did not sacrifice and gave some of it to their respective girlfriends. Jason kept Melissa's cosmetics bag, which he used to make a marijuana kit. He also kept her jacket, which he altered and wore. After Jason reenacted the victim's murder, Detective Bond asked him how he felt about killing the victim. He responded that he had passed through the 7th gate, which he explained was a human sacrifice, and that it made him feel good. Jason told the detective that she was hard to kill and that this was a human sacrifice. A discrepancy exists between Jason's first reenactment of the murder and the third reenactment by Jason and John together. In the first reenactment, Jason said they had taken Melissa's jewelry after she was dead. In the third reenactment, Jason said Melissa was still alive when they took her jewelry. John agreed with the latter statement. Referring back to when Melissa's body was found and Jason and John were arrested, it states, on June 1st, 1988, children playing in a wooded area in Springfield, Oregon, found a human body covered with brush and a board. Near the victim's body, the police found a turquoise ring, a lapel or hat pin, and human hair matching Melissa's. The ring and pin were identified as being the victim's property. Several hundred yards away from the body, the police found a campsite, cooking pots, utensils, multicolored candles arranged in a circle, and a machete, which later was identified as belonging to Jason Rose. John Ray Jones was a friend of Jason's. Michelle Slagle was John's friend. After Melissa's body was found, Jason and John talked with Michelle Slagle about Melissa Meyer's death. John told Michelle that he and Jason had killed Melissa. Michelle testified that Jason said that they beat the shit out of her, they choked her, kicked her ribs in, and that he used a machete to choke her. Robin Newman worked with Jason and John. Robin testified that Jason told her that he knew something about Melissa's death, that he and John had to kill her in order to get money, that Melissa had a price on her head, and that it was easy to kill a friend, especially if you know them and they don't know what's going on, because you can get close to a friend. On different occasions, Robin saw Jason and John with rune stones. The two would throw the rune stones on the ground and then, with the aid of a book, interpret their meaning. Jason told the police that the runes said that if we did not kill Melissa, we would die. Janice Johnson also saw Jason using the rune stones. Jason told her that he used the stones to find out whom he would kill next, and that sometimes he had to hurt good people or kill them. By the time the police had focused their investigation on Jason and John, the two had gone to Arizona. The police located them, and on June 13, 1988, Captain Smith and Detective Bond flew to Arizona and arrested Jason and John for murder. Jason was advised of his Miranda rights, which he said that he understood and was willing to waive. He agreed to talk to the police about Melissa's death. During the interview, Jason gave several versions of the cause of Melissa's death. First, he said he knew the victim, but did not know how she died. Second, he said he had seen the victim on the day she died, but that he did not know how she died. Third, he said he was with the victim when a tree branch fell, killing her, and he got scared, covered the body, and left. In his fourth recount of the story, he said he threw a wooden spear that he was carrying, and that the spear struck a tree branch which broke and fell on the victim, killing her. When Detective Bond told Jason that John had confessed to murder and had implicated him, Jason said that John had killed Melissa and that he himself was only an accessory to her death. Jason said he did not want to kill the victim, but he had put a chokehold on her until she became unconscious, and that after he laid her on the ground, John whacked her on the back of the neck twice with a machete. Jason said the victim was a black witch, who was a friend of Vaughn Shelton, a person who had threatened to kill Jason. He said John had wanted Melissa dead, and that after Jason had her in a sleeper hold, John said, "I give you this sacrifice in the name of Arioch." Jason said he and John then placed a spear across the victim's neck and stood on both ends of it for 10 minutes. Then they removed the victim's jewelry and sacrificed it to some god. Jason said that they then removed the victim's blouse and ripped her pants to make it appear as though she had been raped, and then they put her body in the shrubs and covered it with a board. Once arriving back in Oregon, the detectives took Jason and John to the scene of the crime, where both men agreed to reenact the murder. 3 reenactments of the murder were recorded on a single videotape. The first reenactment was by Jason alone, the second was by John alone, and the third was by Jason and John together. A mannequin was used to portray the victim in all 3 reenactments. Jason's trial began in April of 1989. Over 8 days, there was testimony from 60 witnesses for the prosecution and 35 witnesses for the defense. Jason's behavior in court was described by psychiatrist George Sakow as calm and respectful, but that was common for a person who has serious behavioral problems. On the stand, he said Jason suffered from permanent and dangerous antisocial personality disorder. They can present temporary facades that are quite convincing on a short-term basis. They tend to be manipulative and glib, and they tend to say what you want them to say. On April 20th, 1989, Jason was found guilty of aggravated murder at 21 years old, as well as first-degree robbery. The following week, the jury began deliberating if he should be sentenced to die. During this time, John was awaiting his trial on aggravated murder charges. As the jury deliberated on Jason's punishment, they would all have to agree unanimously that Melissa's murder was deliberate and unprovoked. They'd also have to be unanimous in deciding that Jason would likely be dangerous in the future. If any of those issues ended up being not unanimous, 21-year-old Jason would get life in prison with a minimum of 30 years. The last time anyone had been given a death sentence in Lane County, Oregon, was in 1927. On May 16, 1989, the jury all agreed to sentence Jason to death, making him the 20th person to be on death row in the state. Jason was asked if he had anything to say about his sentence. He said, "I don't think I should receive this." His mother, Pam Rose, made a statement, "I do not condone what has happened, but I do love him. I don't want him to die. He can be rehabilitated. It's the drugs that led to all of this. And I'm so sorry for Melissa's parents. I'm so sorry." Melissa's father told the judge that he and his wife had chosen to adopt Melissa, but had no choice in her death, and that a major part of their hopes and dreams had been destroyed. Originally, John Jones had been charged with aggravated murder and first-degree robbery, but Judge George Foote ruled in June of 1989 that the state failed to prove the specific time and cause of Melissa's death. Even though George Foote said John had intended to kill Melissa and did so, with evidence of probable cause of death being the chokehold that Jason administered on Melissa. John was convicted June 8th of intentional murder and third-degree robbery. During John's trial, it was brought up that John had an opportunity to change the course of that whole night and save Melissa. However, his defense team claimed he wasn't the type to speak up and he was scared to say anything. On July 10, 1989, at 18 years old, John was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 25 years, with another 5-year term to run concurrently, and would have to pay $50 to the state's Victims Assistance Fund. If he is ever released, he is to pay Melissa's family $5,000, ordered by Judge George Foote. In a very unsuspected twist, on May 10, 1990, the Albany Democrat-Herald out of Albany, Oregon, reported that Jason Rose was involved in a murder-for-hire scheme. He had been contacted by an acquaintance that Lori Eberlein's ex-husband would pay Jason $1,000 to have her murdered. Jason agreed. During the hearing for this case, John testified against Jason, along with others. Jason's defense attorney spoke to the jury, telling them to take into account the credibility of the witnesses. In closing arguments, the defense attorney said the case never would have been prosecuted if it had involved someone less notorious than Jason Rose. The prosecutor talked to the jury, saying, quote, "Jason Rose probably comes close to being the most dangerous person you'll ever see. He deserves to be convicted." He also called the conviction insurance against Jason's release from prison in the event Jason's death sentence happened to be reversed on appeal, or that the law governing the death penalty was ever thrown out before the sentence was executed. Which, spoiler alert, Jason's sentence did eventually get changed to life in prison. On May 23, 1990, the World newspaper out of Coos Bay, Oregon, among other newspapers, reported that Jason had been sentenced, while he was on death row, to 30 more years to run concurrent with the sentences that he was already serving for the 1988 murder-for-hire case. The Lane County Circuit Judge Jack Madison sentenced Jason Rose under the Dangerous Offender Statute, which required him to serve a minimum of 30 years and undergo psychological treatment before being considered for release. Jason was also to serve 25 years for burglary and weapon charges and 15 years for 3 forgery convictions. Jason was in trouble yet again, reported on March 24, 1994, by the Statesman Journal out of Salem, Oregon. Jason had been slapped with another charge for possessing a weapon in prison. Officers had discovered in his pocket a sock filled with batteries while he was in the dining room. The Corvallis Gazette-Times reported on December 23, 1997, that Jason had filed a civil lawsuit regarding his religious rights. Jason argued to overturn his conviction, he needed the Dungeons & Dragons game. He wanted the Dungeons & Dragons books, dice, and a board big enough to accommodate a small-scale dungeon, wilderness, and other areas where he could play. U.S. District Judge Owen Panner ruled the week prior that implements of crime usually are not relevant in appeal, and prison officials had reasonable safety concerns to ban a game with such a history of violence. Judge Owen ruled that prison officials did not violate Jason's rights by confiscating the game and an Odinist or Odinist religious medallion. As far as what I could find, Jason Wayne Rose is still in prison serving a life sentence, and John is as well. I couldn't find anything that said either was released. It seems each time their release dates approach, they both have shown during their psychological exams that both of them have been said to have present severe emotional disturbance, also known as PSED, and that constitutes a threat to the health, or safety of the community. In closing this episode, Melissa's dad later said while crying, "I miss everything about Melissa. I miss having her there. I miss having her mature into a woman. I miss the opportunity of her being married, having children, and her eventually having grandchildren. I miss her laugh. I miss having half of my family." And that is the tragic story of Melissa Meyer's death and the two perpetrators, Jason Rose and John Jones. Thank you so much for listening. If you're enjoying the show, please don't forget to leave a 5-star review on any podcast app that you're listening on. Also, follow the socials. Twitter is Reverie Crime Pod, Instagram Reverie True Crime, Facebook Reverie True Crime, and you can contact me for case suggestions or feedback about the episodes at reverietruecrime@gmail.com. Until next time, please stay safe and take care.